me say this. So after he explained, or as we explained, that he's not explaining, he's only presenting the predicament. So as he presented well, as he proved very well that the the terms tzaddik, rasha, benoni, that these characters aren't understandable. They're seemingly under the simple understanding of trying to measure these different categories by measuring their Torah and mitzvahs, the vushay hanefesh, their behavior. If I try to measure people only through their behavior, relatively a superficial scale of productivity, then I have very, very many seeming contradictions between them. That's what we've been explaining until now. So we asked several questions. We're not going to go over them again, but different quotations from the Gemara, from the Zohar that we need to understand. And then the story about Rava, who considered himself a Beinoni, and he proved that you certainly can't say that a Beinoni is half-half. He hasn't yet concluded what anything is, but he proved that you can't say what you think to say initially. And what is that? That you'd think, initially you'd hear Tzaddik Rosh Beinoni, 1, 2, 3, then you'd think that number 2 is in between 1 and 3, that Beinoni is half-half. He's half a Rasha, half a Tzaddik, half of Averis, half mitzvah. So that he proved that you certainly can't say that. That was the point we reached up to over here. That being said, he then asks, that we find mentioned in very many places. Ba'alma means literally means the world, but the term means like spread out. We find this term commonly used. So that we find in Chazal, in our sages, commonly use the phrase tzaddik as referring to someone who's is majority good, and the Beinoni is someone who's half-half. So that's what he asks. So if this is untrue, this is not the true explanation, and as he just presented in great length, that it's definitely, you can't say that because of all the proofs that he brought, then how come often we find the term used that way? So he explains that this term tzaddik and beinoni is commonly used to refer to mechza mikrei beinoni, to refer to someone who's half of Averis, half mitzvahs, as being mediocre. So this phrase beinoni is also used as mediocreness, which means just half, which we just proved isn't the true meaning. And also rov zchuyot mikrei tzaddik. We also find in very many sources that you call a person a tzaddik because he's done more good than bad. And he says that those sources that you find to use, it's because it's Shem HaMushal. Very often the phrase is the literal meaning here, Shem HaMushal, that phrase is like saying a loaned phrase, that you loan a phrase, that a person is I don't know, he's very angry, so you say that he's fiery angry. So it doesn't mean that he's on fire. It means that you've loaned a certain trait from fire, and you're referring it now to someone's psychological state. So the same thing here. The tzaddik is a term, and it's very often loaned. The true meaning of a tzaddik, as I'll explain, is we haven't really explained it yet, but it's something very, very special. It definitely doesn't mean that you have a majority of mitzvahs, only a majority of mitzvahs, and just a few of favors. Definitely doesn't mean that. Nonetheless, it can be used in context, in reference, in such a meaning. For instance, if a person went to court, like even the Torah uses this phrase. Torah says that if you're a judge, then ve'tzdik et tzaddik, ve'rshi et rasha, you have to justify the righteous person and condemn the wicked person. So not necessarily is the person who lost at court wicked. It doesn't have to be a rasha. It just means that he was wrong. We had a dispute, and I thought that that this piece of land, my border ended here. You thought the border ended there. We went to court, and I was wrong, so I'm called the rasha. You were right. You're called the tzaddik. Doesn't mean you're the Rebbe. It doesn't mean you're the Rebbe. It's a loaned phrase. That being correct in context, the phrase can also be used in that context. It's called a loaned phrase.
Borrowed phrase. It's borrowed phrase.
Yeah, that's a term. You say that in English, a borrowed phrase.
Yeah.
Okay, but yeah, so it's a borrowed phrase. That's exactly the meaning of what he says here. Shem hamushal, a borrowed phrase. So very often you will find the term tzaddik or beinoni in such a context. But if you'll see it, you'll look into the meaning, the context in which it's mentioned. So it's always used as a borrowed term. Where is it borrowed from? It's borrowed from the meaning that we're explaining here. That truly what a tzaddik is a certain type of person, a very, very very special person. And therefore that term, when borrowed, is referring to being just or correct in a certain context. Same thing, Beinoni. He's an intermediate, as we've explained this before, a true intermediate, a true memutza between the tzaddik and the rasha, as we'll explain. And therefore the term can also be borrowed to refer to anything mediocre, any middleness. But these are all borrowed phrases, and that we find a lot in Chazal. Again, the phrase he uses here, the Rabbi, to differentiate between where these terms are used in an essential context and where they're borrowed. So he refers to all the borrowed contexts as something that's discussing sachar v'onesh, a person's reward and repentance and punishment and reward. For instance, that example I said here, that when I lose, like I lose a court or I lose money to you, you sued me and I lose, so I'm Rasha. Right? Because or it could also be used in a more spiritual context. For instance, maybe the most famous context is what Chazal say that on Yom Kippur, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or on Rosh Hashanah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu opens 3 books. And there definitely, it doesn't mean, the phrases are borrowed phrases. That if you're found just, like if HaKadosh Baruch Hu finds you, the idiom there is explicit that there's like a scale. If there's a majority of mitzvahs, then your scale is tipped to being a tzaddik bedino, which refers, again, like he's saying here, to the outcome. To what comes of it, for all practical reasons, you're a tzaddik. You're left around in the world in that context over there. But it has nothing to do with a person's essence or a person's state of being. It's just borrowing that phrase from such people who are in such a state of being and referring it to a borrowed context. So all those borrowed contexts, he calls them measuring the outcome. The sachar v'onesh is like measuring the outcome, not measuring the essence itself, but measuring for all practical reasons. You're measuring what comes of it. So when you're measuring a situation in regards of what comes of the situation, then you'd use these terms in a borrowed manner. But really the terms are referring to the essence of the situation, the definition of the situation, of the person or the context being discussed. And then it means, as he proved before, when you borrow it to a certain context, the context of the outcome, then it's used in a more superficial manner. That's what he explains. This is not a big chiddush. Obviously, we all speak this way. All of the language is full of borrowed terms, and you always have to differentiate between what the meaning of the word is and what you're using it for. So it's not a big chiddush what he's saying here. It's obvious that this is the meaning in all these places. He's been justified at court, so he's called the tzaddik. He's the just one. Doesn't mean he's a more just person, but he's been justified. But the true meaning, the true category, or the true naming of a tzaddik, like calling a person a tzaddik, essentially calling, but that this is what he is, not that this is the situation, not measuring the situation, measuring the person that way. On that, on the the essential differentiation between the tzaddikim and the beinonim, in that context, Chazal said, tzaddikim yetzer tov shoftan. So this is again is a phrase that he's quoting from the Gemara, as we quoted before, and he'll explain it later on in chapter 13, the beginning of chapter 13, or he starts explaining in chapter 10. But he already quoted this phrase before, and if you recall, last week or the week before, we already discussed and pronounced the question that arises from this quotation. This is maybe one of the most, I don't know if controversial, but perplexing quotations that Chazal described the Rasha, or the tzaddik in the Rasha. So they describe the tzaddik as being someone who has only good judgment. That is, all of his judgment is Yetzer Tov. Yetzer Tov Shoftan. The word Shoftan means judgment, like your mental judgment. Not only does he decree to do good, but his entire judgment he has only Yetzer Tov. The Yetzer is like, again, an inclination. So that's how Chazal described the tzaddik. Yetzer Tov Shoftan, that his judgment is all good, which is the quotation he's quoting here again. He quoted this before in the beginning of the chapter as a question, and now he's just re-quoting it. He hasn't explained it yet, but he's re-quoting it as in the same context that we've already said, that a true tzaddik is someone who not only has more decreed actions to good, that his Yetzer Tov is what actualized, but as we said before, Chazal say that a tzaddik is someone whose judgment is only Yetzer Tov. Like he only considers good. Not only does he actually do it. Pshita, obviously, he only actualized good because it's his only consideration. He has no other judgment whatsoever. So that's a true tzaddik. Shene'emar, now he's going to bring several quotations from our sources, psukim, where a tzaddik is described that way. The quotation is from David HaMelech in Tehillim. Shene'emar v'libi chalal b'kirbi. Like David HaMelech says about himself, that my heart, libi, is halal b'kirbi, which could mean, that word halal literally could mean two meanings. So I don't know to say which one of them he means here. It's a machlekes in the mefarshim of the pasuk, and both of them could fit in here. I don't know if there's, maybe the Rebbe has I think the Rabbi has a footnote here or something, but I don't think he himself even decrees. The word halal could literally mean hollow, a hollow space, like halal achitzon, outer space, is called halal. So libi halal b'kirbi could mean that David HaMelech is saying that my heart, like that my evil inclination has been eradicated from my heart, so it's hollow. It's hollow of my evil inclination. Or it could mean halal also means a corpse. If you've killed someone, then he's a halal, kipol halal basadeh. So halal also means someone who's been killed. So it could literally mean that David HaMelech is referring to that he's killed his Yetzer Hara, or that he's emptied his Yetzer Hara. I don't know exactly the literal meaning here, which one of them is true. Some Mefarshim say this way. On the pasuk, some Mefarshim say this way, some Mefarshim say that way. And because he's killed him, his Yetzer Hara betanit, with in his avoida, he's managed, David HaMelech, to eradicate his Yetzer Hara. Again, still the word halal could either mean that he's that very thing, that he's killed it, or that he's emptied it. How did he empty it? His Yetzer Hara, by killing it. So the sentence could be read in either way. Aval kol mi shelo hagiya lemadriga zu, anyone who hasn't reached that state of mind, again, where his judgment, Yetzer Tov Shofto, Yetzer Tov Shoftan, that his entire judgment is only good, not just that his behavior is good, his actualization, that also his mere judgment is only good. If you haven't reached that state of mind, which would be called that you have no Yetzer Hara, again, you have no inclination to bad, no consideration of bad, no judgment, there's no debate, no inner debate going on. Whoever hasn't reached that state, again, this still is not an explanation. We haven't explained anything yet. It's just quotations proving that you have to say this. He'll explain everything. What does it mean that a person has no consideration, that his judgment is only good? All these things will be explained in great length later on. But it's very important to me throughout this entire chapter, like I said in the first class here, that the main nikud of understanding in chapter 1 is that he's not explaining anything. He's just perplexing you. He's undermining what you might think, what you would have understood. So also here, even though he's proved many things, the proofs that he brings are only in order to show that you can't say what you would say. And then in a second, we'll see that in light of all of his questions, all of his proven paradoxes, he then says that really, in order to understand this, we need to introduce a lot of concepts. We need to deepen our understanding of these characters. Which actually, what he's looking to say is that the superficial measurement that tends initially, every person tends initially to measure himself and others, mainly in light of their behavior, of what comes of them, their efficiency. That's because we have again a very superficial tendency in life. Then it's not sufficient. It's not capable. You can't settle all of the different quotations I brought you, all the different sources in Chazal, all the different understandings are not understandable. They're not settlable in such a measurement. If you attempt to measure these characters only by measuring their behavior, then you are forced to admit that there are many, many questions you can't answer. And therefore, you have to say that the understanding is dependent on a deeper measurement of a person. That being said, the next chapters are explaining those deeper measurements that are needed in order to reassess these three characters, which will then be represented correctly from chapter 10 through 12. So again, that's all the point he's trying to make here. Someone who hasn't achieved that level, even though his mitzvahs are much more than his avoidness, still he's not considered a tzaddik at all. Again, it could very well be that in a certain situation in court he'd be justified, but he's not a just person, as you use the phrase essentially to define a character. He could be just in a context, in a situation that could be used, such as the phrase could be borrowed to refer to even to a Russia. But he's not what you'd call madrigat tzaddik. He's not on the level of tzaddik essential, klal at all. Therefore, because that's the case, this is why Chazal say Beit Midrash, this is why we find that Chazal say that the tzaddik, there are very few tzaddik. Again, if a tzaddik is just a person who's just, he has majority of good, like that the idiom in the Mishnah about Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, that everybody has a scale, and if your scale, what's the pshat there? That if your scale, chas v'shalom, if a person's scale is tipped to being a rasha, then he's decreed to death. So everybody who survived last Rosh Hashanah we're all tzaddikim. That's the pshat there. That's what the Mishnah says. So obviously, Baruch Hashem, we've all survived, at least for now, we've all survived Rosh Hashanah. And that being the case, we're all tzaddikim. So that's not muatim. That's not few. Everybody in the world is a tzaddik that way, or he wouldn't be around. At least not till the end of the year. That's the pshat in the Mishnah there. So obviously, we're all tzaddikim that way. We're all HaKadosh Baruch Hu is better off having us around than not. That's the bottom line. And that doesn't mean that our depth and intimacy, as we've explained this before, this is how we usually explain this. I don't remember if this time around we discussed it, that what comes of these two angles that he presents, we very often like keep attaching them to the classic texts in which they're conveyed. That if you read the pshat in the Rambam in many places, then he likes quoting the Mishnah about half, and if you do more mitzvahs, you're a tzaddik, you do more averas. Also the Rambam, he's discussing a borrowed term. And the Alter Rebbe presents things on the scale as he presented it just now, that if you've ever done any avera in the world, if you've been capable of doing an avera, you're already a rasha. We like connecting these two scales, if you would, and saying that they're referring to two different layers of relationship. This has to do with what he presented before. When the Alter Rebbe says, what we mentioned a few moments ago, that he calls the superficial scale, he calls it sachar ve'onesh. That needs, maybe I didn't stress it enough. It's a chiddush to say that any time you discuss a superficial scale, the borrowed term, then what you're talking about, I don't know if you notice, maybe you don't even know this about yourself, but a person who tends to use the phrase tzaddik Rosh Beinoni in context of sachar ve'onesh, and so in the I said wrong. Again, a person who tends to use the superficial scale of measuring a tzaddik, a Rosh, and a Beinoni in light of their of being a majority of zchuyot or avonot, is because his mentality of avodas Hashem is evolving around sachar ve'onesh. What he's looking to measure is the efficiency, or what's the word, the feasibility of avodas Hashem. Is it worth it for me, or is it not worth it for me? That's the bottom line. And also, it's also assuming that HaKadosh Baruch Hu measures me that way. And that's the pshat, like we said, on Rosh Hashanah. Saying that there's like a scale, is saying as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to himself, this Effie guy, is it worth it for me to leave him around, or not worth it for me? Is he more profitable, or are my expenses higher than my profits, or are my profits higher than my expenses? So thinking also, and also me, if I think of Hashem that way, it's because I'm also thinking that way. I'm also thinking, is it feasible to serve Hashem? I'm giving up on some hamburgers in this world, and the hamburgers in the next world, the bigger hamburgers, the smaller hamburgers. Is it worth my while to serve Hashem? That the Alter Rebbe chooses this term to categorize the tendency to measure things superficially is very, very. It's a very deep insight. It's not just a random choice of words. He's making a very important point here, that tendency of measuring Yiddishkeit that way is leaning on the assumption that all of my relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a question of is it worth my while or not. And also all of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's relationship with me is a question for him if I'm worth his while or not. So this is that's why he calls the superficial scale, again, the borrowed terminology, he calls it sachar ve'onesh. Even though, again, it doesn't necessarily have to do anything with sachar ve'onesh directly, right? If we have an argument, then I can be tzaddik, I can be correct. So that doesn't make me a tzaddik, but I've borrowed the term. Now, maybe I don't win a prize for that. I don't have any direct gain. So why does he call all this sachar ve'onesh? Because really thinking that way is thinking of, is it worth it for me or not worth it? Like, who beat who? Who's gained and who's lost? So very often we like saying that in life you can find these both scales we use, both scales are true in life. Like the examples we always bring, that if you have a meeting with a person, and most of the people you have relationships with, so you measure that way. If I have a worker, or if I have a storekeeper that I have a relationship with, again, so if this worker or other people that I have a practical relationship with, if they're worth my while, if my worker is more profitable than his expenses, and he's a good worker, he's a tzaddik, I'm going to keep him around. If he's more expensive to me, it costs me more than he makes. Yeah, it could be like a very intricate, detailed, like you need a professional business expert in order to measure exactly the profit. But in the bottom line, I measure your profit and your expenses, how much it costs me to keep you around. And if you're costing me more money than you're making, then I'm going to fire you. Obviously, I'm not going to keep you around. And in light of that scale, Be'emes HaBeinoni would be saying that someone is he's in between. He costs just about as much as he makes, and So maybe I'll tell him, like in Rosh Hashanah, I'll tell him you have 10 days now to do tshuva, so you made tshuva, you have to better your ways. You can take your worker and you'll tell him, I'm not looking to keep around people for no reason. You're not doing any damage, but you're also not making any profit. So either you get your act together, or I'm gonna kick you out. That's the pshat there. So obviously we have many relationships that are measured that way. But again, what's the like Dr. Rebbe says here, what's the common denominator of all of those relationships? That they're all seeking external profit. Meaning, I'm not looking to have a relationship with my worker. I'm looking to make money, whatever it is I do in my job. In order to do that, I have to say good morning to him. I have to be nice to him. I have to have a relationship. The relationship is part of what I need for the profit. When that's the case, things are measured in light of their outcome, superficially. But if I have a true relationship, like a deep relationship, meaning that the relationship is the point itself, that's what I'm seeking. Simplest example would be like a spouse, children. That if a person gets married, you don't get married in order to have someone to do your dishes, right? You even though also in married life there is a certain amount of gain and expense, but the gain and expense are just the background. What you're looking for is the relationship itself. In a superficial relationship, then the relationship serves the profit. And in an internal relationship, the profit and gain are what's serving the relationship. In order for us to be married, we also need to do the dishes and take out the garbage. But I do that because what I want is the relationship. But if you're working in my business, then it's the exact opposite. What I want is the business. In order for it to work well, I need a relationship. If I don't say hello and good morning, then the business is not going to work well. So the relationship is serving the business, the behavior. In an internal relationship, the behavior is serving the relationship. Again, this is all to express what the Alter Rebbe says here, that he categorizes the borrowed term as sachar ve'onish. It's all leaning on conceiving the relationship with Hashem. And we could, like we said now in examples from life, we could even say about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that there is a certain layer between us and Hashem, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a project going on. He's building a home for himself, a dirah b'tachtonim, and we need to, we're the workers here. And if we do good, like if we're building the buildings, if I lay more blocks down than I take apart, then okay, then it'll keep me around. And same thing here. I could say that I have sachar ve'onish. I have my interests in my service of Hashem, that I get olam haba or whatever other such things. It's not nonsense. It's all true. Such a layer exists, and there, the measurements are also relevant in their borrowed context. But why does the Alter Rebbe negate this opinion? Just because he's not discussing it. Not that he disagrees that there's such a layer. But if you want to talk about intimacy, you want to write a book about your relationship with Hashem, so those layers have nothing to do with the relationship. They're just layers of feasibility. They're not layers of intimacy. So by presenting the Alter Rebbe's scale in the beginning of the book, he just wants to clarify what part of our relationship with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu am I discussing. He's written another book, as we pointed out before, called the Shulchan Aruch, where it's all a guidance of feasibility. But in Tanya, that's not the topic. And both are true, in a sense. They're not really both true, because the external, like any exterior is always the exterior of an interior. There's no such thing as an independent exterior. It's just what's needed to hold together, like in a cup. You have a cup, so you only use the interior of the cup. You don't need the exterior. So why don't people produce cups with only interiors? Okay, because it's not going to work. You can't only make an interior. You need what the exterior is what holds. It's the external layer of the interior. Same thing here. That there's like a profit and gain between us and Hashem. That is the exterior of our relationship. Just like in a married couple. that there's what comes about with marriage, like the misgeret, the frame of marriage, where you have to do your chores or take the kids to school and change diapers or whatever it is that you need to do in a married life. So that's the structure that contains the relationship. So really, it's not what I said before isn't completely true. It's not completely true that there are two independent layers, that you could say that there's an external service of Hashem and that's completely true, and there's an internal service of Hashem. No, it's true that there's an exterior, and we're not looking to diminish the importance of the outcome of your Torah and mitzvahs, of your behavior. And Ma'aseh Wa'ikar is very important. Just like if a person comes to couples therapy and you want to better their intimacy and relationship, it doesn't mean that he should stop doing the dishes. It's not the practicality isn't the problem, but it's also not an independent layer. It doesn't really exist in of itself. It only exists as the exterior of the interior. So if there would be no relationship, then there would really be no reason to do dishes. So you can't picture an exterior without an interior. Hypothetically, you could picture the opposite. There's an interior without an exterior, but it would be a chaotic picture. It would have no frame. Nothing would hold it together. But it would have content. But if you just picture a frame with no content, so that's perplexing. It's not logical. That's just to make that point clear. That on the one hand, it's not a machlokes. In the Rambam and the Alter Rebbe, they don't disagree. They're just talking about two different, completely true layers. But even though we say they're both completely true, still one is dependent on the other. The interior is obviously the truer layer of the relationship, whereas the exterior is what holds it together, but it's not independent. So if you were to picture the exterior independent of the interior, then it wouldn't be avodas Hashem at all. Wouldn't be serving a Kodesh Baruch Hu at all. So if you go to work and you happen to work in a stockbroker who he gives 10% of his money to charity, then no one would say that you're serving Hashem when you go to work. That charity comes of it. If it's only an exterior, there's no interior, then it's not the service of Hashem at all. So you can't really picture the exterior disconnected from the interior. But if you picture them together, so they're both very true. It's not looking to diminish the importance of behavior or even of a superficial measurement of life. So that's just a point to be made here. So in a sense, that's what we just said now. The point we made is a conclusion of what we've studied up until the two dots here. The end of, we haven't read the last three words. He brings another quotation that there could even, that the tzaddikim are so few, and the inner tzaddikim, not those who their behavior is tolerable. They don't need to be fired. No, but they're mamish tzaddik. So they're very few, and therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu spread them out throughout the generations. And the other verse says that there could even be such a generation that there's one tzaddik, and the whole world is only on one side. Tzaddik Yesod Olam. He's the foundation of the whole world. Now again, what we said before is in a sense the conclusion of this entire portion of the chapter. That the Alter Rebbe resets your mind on a different angle of how am I supposed to measure my service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if we refer, we haven't, as we point to, we haven't explained the details yet, but if we refer the conclusions up until now, just of saying that tzaddik is someone who has no evil inclination, and if you even have an inclination, if you're even capable of doing an avera, you're a rasha. So we'll see that such a measurement would be fit to very deep intimate relationships in life. Like if I were to say that, like we said before, that if you work in my factory, then as long as you're making more money than you cost, than your expense, then you're at tzaddik. No, that makes perfect sense. Everybody can swallow that. Now, even though maybe you're not a very I don't know, you're not very good at one of the aspects of the work, and you drop glasses every once in a while and you break them, and that costs me money, right? And maybe you're even not nice to me, and that frustrates me, and then I need to pay my psychologist. That also costs me money. But okay, at the bottom line, end of the day, you make more than you cost. If I were capable of like adding it all up, then I'd say, okay, this worker is very annoying. He's costing me $50 a week in glasses, and he's costing me, I don't know, another $500 a week in psychological therapy because he's so annoying. But he makes me $500,000 a week. So, okay, so it's in my interest to leave him around. So that makes sense to everybody. Everybody would leave such a worker around. But if I would tell you that with your wife, you're also a very good husband because you take out the garbage, you take your kids to school, and you're usually very nice, but you only beat her once a week. So that would be preposterous. If you said something like that, it's ridiculous. Why? Why is it so ridiculous? It's in your best interest to stay married because it's rubo's zchuyot. You're doing more good than bad. And it's true that every once in a while you beat your wife up, but it's only once a week. So it's lo nora. You can tolerate it, and you take the kids to school on time. So you're Rav Zchuyot. So if I try to measure an intimate relationship on that scale, it will be preposterous. It doesn't even begin. And like we've said before, even if you don't beat your wife, it doesn't make you a tzaddik. It's like a bare minimum. That's the image of the Beinoni here. If you're even capable of considering such a thing, you're not even married. It hasn't even begun. Like if you can consider doing an avera, just like stepping on Hashem, so you're a Roshak. It's a completely different scale. When I try to fit it into my life, then I'll see that the Alter Rebbe's measurement is suiting to my most intimate relationships. And the borrowed phrase is suited to superficial relationships. What's the difference between those superficial relationships and the intimate relationships? It's the question, what is it that I'm looking for? An intimate relationship, like we said before, is a relationship where the relationship is the purpose of what's going on. I'm looking to have it's not serving something else. It's not that I need the relationship in order to serve something else. It's that the relationship is called pnimius. That's why in Hebrew, the word pnimius comes from the word panim, what you're facing, where your face is facing. Like where are you, what's your purpose? So what are you facing? If you're facing the relationship, that's what you're looking for. That's called an internal relationship, a pnimi relationship. An external relationship is where you're doing something, but you're facing your goal, which is something else. So I'm having a relationship with you, but it's only because I want to produce more money in my factory. So my face is facing the factory, the money. And in order for that to work, I have to say good morning to you. I have to come to your kid's bar mitzvah and buy you a present. But the relationship I have with you is serving something else. And that all of this is what he means when he calls it sachar ve'onish. That such a mentality is typical of a relationship that's looking for sachar ve'onish. It's looking for what comes of it, not looking for the relationship itself. But if you're looking for the relationship itself, then if I were to try to measure that kind of relationship, like marriage, or for instance, on the same scale, I'd get a preposterous image. That if you can only beat your wife once, then you're an okay. It's crazy. So the entire measurement flips if I refer it to a different type of relationship. So when the Alter Rebbe sets his scale this way, he's positioning you where he wants, in the way he wants you to see your relationship with Hashem. As we noted before, that in a sense, he wants to say that point itself is what needs rectification. That you tend to measure your relationship with Hashem in a superficial way, that itself is the problem. like we say this as a joke very often, that like a couple comes to therapy, and one of the like the wife would say that, you know, my husband doesn't love me, he doesn't cherish me the whole day, and then the husband, as an answer to the therapist, he could say, what, I buy her everything she wants, I give her my credit cards, she drives a fancy car, and not only would that not be soothing to his wife, but that's like, for her, that's proof that he doesn't love her. Why? Because again, this is exactly what we're saying here. That you tend to latch on to superficial measurements, that itself you need to do tshuva about. That you'd think to be a tzaddik because you never beat a Kadosh Baruch Hu, you never smack him, so I'm a tzaddik, I'm sach hakol b'seh. That you measure your relationship that way, that itself is an avera. You know, seeing your relationship that way with Hashem is an insult. Because Kadosh Baruch Hu wants intimacy with you. He wants to marry you. He wants to have an internal relationship with you, and he complains. He complains to the Beis Din Shel Mala. He complains to the psychologists of heaven. HaKadosh Baruch Hu complains to them, and he says that my wife, my creations, they don't love me. They don't care about me. And what do you say to him? No, but I do a lot of mitzvahs. I give you my credit card. I pay you my money. I do everything I'm needed. Now leave me alone. That's what you're saying. So the tendency to measure our relationship with Hashem in superficial terms, the tendency itself needs rectifying. So by setting such a scale of viewing your service with Hashem, the Alter Rebbe is already clarifying like the existential state of mind needs reconsideration, needs tshuva, before you even get down to any detail. So that's, for us, we've concluded the majority, the first part of chapter Aleph, chapter 1, which is the majority of that chapter. As we concluded in the flow of things here, the most important point is to realize that he's left us perplexed. That he presented a completely new scale of viewing things. He proved to us that is the scale that Chazal truly meant, and any other usage of these terms is a borrowed term. And he also proved that the simple measurement of behavior, which we're acquainted with and we're accustomed to, isn't sufficient, because we have all kinds of questions. How did Rava say this? How could it say the Gemara this, the Zohar that? It's too perplexing to explain with those tools. So the next words in Tanya, we'll read the next 3 words before next week we'll go into it. After the 2 dots here, he says, Ach biur ha'inyan. Okay, but the explanation of the whole issue, he's left you with an issue, with an inyan, with a perplexion, and he doesn't think he's explained anything. What does he think he's done up until now? He's bought time. He's got your attention, and he's bought time. Now that I've shown to you that it's too complicated to finalize all of this, to understand all these questions with a superficial understanding, now abide with me, and we'll start explaining the whole inyan. How will we do that? So Be'emet, we're now stepping into 8 chapters of introductions, 8 chapters of background and terminology that will, in light of those 8 chapters, that will enable us to have enough depth of our relationship with Hashem and of ourselves to reassess these terms of the Tzaddik Rosh and Beinoni, and that reassessment will settle all of the perplexions of chapter 1. So chapter 1 ends with a proven perplexion, and not the end of chapter 1, this portion, and then at this point he starts 8 chapters of background. Bide with me for the background, and then I'll re-explain the entire concept. So that's what we're stepping into now, B'ezrat Hashem. So I guess we'll start the next week. We'll start from the Nekudotaim of chapter 1, which is really, in a sense, the beginning of the study itself, because now he's starting to say the content. Up until now, it was more like a presentation of the need for in-depth study, and now the actual study starts in the end of chapter 1. So we'll start that.